Hi class, in this video I want to give you some guidance on your email newsletter assignment. So here's what you're learning this week. You're going to learn about email newsletter usability, and you're going to learn this from Jacob Nielsen. So you've already read about writing for the web, you've read about photos for the web. Now you're going to sort of see what the connection is between writing and presenting photos for the web and writing and presenting photos for email newsletters. And then you're going to read about thought leadership. So you're going to learn about what the purpose of an email newsletter can be. There's different kinds of email newsletters. Some email newsletters are coupons, some are selling products, some are news-based. But what I want you to do this week is to create an email newsletter that uses thought leadership. So I want you not to just make an email newsletter, but to make an email newsletter that focuses on thought leadership. And then I want you to lay that out. So you're learning about email newsletter usability, you're learning about thought leadership and how it can be used in email newsletters, and then you're learning a little bit about email newsletter layout. And you're going to demonstrate what you've learned, first by answering some questions that I have for you in the assignment, but also, second, by creating an email newsletter for your client. And you're going to do this with MailChimp. And it should demonstrate thought leadership. It should be appropriate to the persona that you've created. It should use good email newsletter layout techniques and good web writing and photo techniques. So these are the criteria on which I'm going to be judging your email newsletters. Now, how are you making this? Well, you're going to answer the questions in a Google Doc, and then you're going to use MailChimp to create an email newsletter. This requires you to first complete the readings and answer the questions, and then sign up for MailChimp and use the MailChimp email template tool. Now, you can use content that your client already has. You don't need to write your own content for these newsletters. You also can throw in some content that you think would be great to have. For example, if you know that you would want the email newsletter to link to a blog post, you can write the title of the blog post and a teaser for the blog post, but you don't necessarily have to actually write the blog post. So you have a lot of freedom here to make this newsletter what you want it to be. You can reuse content that already exists, or you can sort of create content that fits in with the environment you're making. Now let's talk a little bit about the process. What are you going to do? Well, first, this is really the same process that you've used throughout the class. You're going to determine your audience, which you've already done. You have personas, so you know about your audience already. You've already determined your audience's needs and problems. And what you're going to do is develop content that delivers on those needs and solves those problems while serving as thought leadership. And they're going to create a template that delivers that content you're going to choose a template that delivers that content in the best way possible. So first you have to decide what's going to be in my email newsletter. How am I going to provide thought leadership? What kinds of things need to be in here? How am I going to solve my segment's problems? Then you're going to choose a template that matches what you need to do. So for example, your solution to content is that you need a very news-heavy email newsletter. Then when you choose a template, you want to choose a news-heavy template. So let's take a look at a few email newsletters because I want you to get familiar with the parts of an email newsletter and how they're working. So this is the email newsletter for Trulia. Trulia is an app and a website that real estate agents and homeowners can post their real estate listings to. And people like you and me can pull out our app and we can see what homes are available for us to buy, and we can search by price or location. So it's really a real estate listing service. And this is their newsletter. Now you'll notice, who's the audience for their newsletter? Is it real estate agents? No. The audience for these newsletters is people like me and you who would use the app. So what are our problems? And what kind of content do we want? Well, our problems are things like, how do we buy a house? How do we know if it's a good house? How do we navigate the process of buying a house? And how do we find our dream house? How do we know when a house is right for us? So one thing Trulia does a lot is they'll sort of pick a topic, and each newsletter will focus on it. So this one is, what does $1 million look like? And they're saying, well, it depends. So this week, they're scoping out the housing markets from coast to coast to see what you can get for $1 million. So this is an interesting little foray into dreamland, right? If you're buying a house, what are your problems? Well, you wish you could buy a nicer house than you can. You wish you knew what ideas you wanted to see, you know, whether you wanted the house to have double doors or a single door on the front. So showing these $1 million houses, first of all, lets you know that, you know, the money doesn't necessarily mean the house is any better, because what they're going to tell you in these stories is that it depends what $1 million looks like. You know, it depends what market you're buying in, what you can get for your money. So you're learning something. And it lets you go into dream territory a little bit. It lets you look at examples of beautiful houses so you can get an idea of what you want to look for in your own house. Now, there's a few elements to this newsletter that are very standard that you should have as well. A newsletter name and slogan at the top. Headlines. You want to make use of headlines. And a navigation. A date so people know when this newsletter was sent to them. You want to have action items. What's interesting about new email newsletters is that you want the call to action to be so obvious a 4-year-old could figure it out. So what is it that you can actually do on this page? Well, you go see more pictures of these houses. So the button to see more pictures is huge and it's bright orange. You cannot miss it. Anytime the people who made this newsletter want you to go do something, they make a big giant button that helps you go do it. So I'm going to call these action items. As you create your newsletter, if you have articles that you want people to read more of, or you want people to sign up for something, or you want people to check out your blog, your action item needs to be really big, like these see more pictures buttons. And then the address and contact information almost always goes down at the bottom of the email, just at the very bottom. If people have signed up for your newsletter, they probably know who you are. So your contact information is probably not something they're really after, but it's always a good thing to have. You also want to think about your design as modules. So in this design, you'll see, and by the way, this is shown in the browser as just one long piece, but it doesn't fit on the slide, so I've broken it into two. You want to think about sections. So the first section is very similar to the website. Your logo, a slogan, navigation. Underneath that is a big featured section. So they have a big picture of a house with a big headline and description. And then underneath that, they have a smaller section. This is another house that's interesting, but not as interesting as that one. And then they repeat that section for different cities. So San Francisco and then New York. And then at the bottom, they have a section that refers readers to the Trulia Trends blog. And then underneath that, they have the contact information. Here's another example. This is an email newsletter for Be the Match, which is a bone marrow registry. And they have a very similar setup. You'll see there's newsletter, name and slogan at the top, so people know exactly who's sending them this email newsletter. The date is prominent at the top as well. There's navigation. When you click it, it takes you to the Be the Match website. And then, address and contact should not be in here. It actually goes down at the bottom. You can't see it. The slide's cutting it off, but it goes down here. So then you have headlines and action items. You can see their action items aren't quite as noticeable as the Trulia email, but they stand out. There are these blue, bold links with arrows at the end. And then you can also see their sections. So the top section is logos, then navigation, then you have the big feature story, and then you have smaller sections for the smaller items. So you'll see in both of these designs, there's one picture that's really big, and the rest of the pictures are smaller. That's exactly what you want to do. You want to pick one section to be really important, and then make all the other sections smaller, and make the pictures in those sections smaller. Let's just look at just a couple more examples. Here's an email newsletter from Avery, and again, you'll see they have the newsletter name. They have headlines, they have action items that are big and bold, you can't really miss them. They have navigation. Interestingly, they have their social media on this email as well. And then they have sections, one big section here, and then a smaller section, and then at the bottom, their contact information. Last but not least, let's look at Skillshare. Skillshare is a website where you can sign up for classes in a university environment, so these are skill classes that you can take online, and you'll see the same things. They have the newsletter name at the top. They have action items. They really want you to enroll in a class. That's how they make their money, is by charging enrollment fees. So the action item is really big, really bold. It's a button, can't miss it. And then they have headlines and some navigation and social media at the bottom, and the address and contact really, really small at the bottom. So what you'll see or what I hope you've seen as I've gone through these, is that there's a hierarchy to your newsletter. Your newsletter name goes at the top. Then you have a big section, usually with an action item. And then you have smaller sections that are similar to each other. So this one has a big picture, all the smaller sections have small pictures. This one has a big headline, all the smaller ones have smaller headlines. And what they're really doing is just repeating kinds of content. So we have what they really want you to do, and then some interesting things. Same with Trulia. What they really want you to do, and then some content that goes with it. So you need to have these same elements: a newsletter name and slogan at the top, an action item, a featured section, headlines, your address and contact information at the bottom, and a navigation of some kind, or social media. They're really using more of social media here than a navigation on Skillshare. But what I wanted to show you was really how the organization works. As you know from the Nielsen readings, people don't read email newsletters. They sort of scan it and look for something interesting. So you want to get your action items to be really, really obvious. In just a few seconds, if I look at this page, here's what I see: Skillshare, teach yourself code, enroll now. It takes almost no effort on my part to understand what they're trying to get me to do. So you want to create a newsletter, an email newsletter that does the same thing, that shows your thought leadership but also drives action. I've included instructions on getting started with MailChimp. This week you have a draft due, so go ahead and make a MailChimp account. Get started in there and start messing around with it and start seeing how you build a newsletter. There's templates that you can choose from, so choose a template that you think is appropriate for the kind of content you have and start seeing what you can do in there. By the end of this week, what I want from you are the answers to the questions in the assignment, as well as a draft that you've put together in MailChimp. Next week, you're going to take that draft and you're going to take my comments on the draft and you're going to improve it, and then you're going to turn in a final version at the end of the week.